My name is Nancy, and I am 69 years old. As a retired family photographer, I dedicated my career to capturing the precious moments that bind families together. The love, the growth, the milestones that create lasting memories. For 43 years, I built not just a successful business, but a comfortable, independent life that I was immensely proud of. Most importantly, I treasured what I believed was an unbreakable bond with my son James, a relationship built on unconditional love and mutual respect. I had poured immense care into our family, even paying James's $25,000 emergency medical bill without hesitation when he needed help, always believing in the authenticity and permanence of our family connection. Then, like a sudden storm that destroys everything in its path, Rachel, my daughter-in-law, launched what I can only describe as an insidious campaign of destruction. She began fabricating lies about me, claiming that I interfered with their marriage, that I undermined her parenting, that my very presence was toxic to their happiness. The phone call that shattered my world came on a Tuesday afternoon. James, my beloved son, called with words that felt like knives. "Mom, Rachel's right about you. You're too judgmental, too controlling. You're no longer welcome in our home." My granddaughter, Emily, the child I had photographed from her first breath, muttered with cold dismissal, "Go away, Grandma. You're toxic." My grandson, Ethan, simply laughed as if my pain was amusing entertainment. My lifetime of devotion, my dignity as a mother and grandmother, everything I had built and cherished was being maliciously twisted and destroyed. I felt utterly discarded, profoundly alone, branded as toxic by the very people I loved most in this world. Yet, as despair threatened to consume me entirely, something deep within my photographer's soul began to stir. 4 decades of capturing family dynamics had taught me to see what others missed, to recognize the truth hidden beneath surface emotions. What Rachel, James, Emily, Ethan, and Rachel's sister Brenda didn't know was my secret weapon, meticulous photo archives that chronicled years of genuine love and connection, personal journals that detailed Rachel's escalating campaign of control, and most importantly, a discreet home security camera that had captured Rachel and James discussing their plot against me, including her chilling statements about my being toxic and her admission of having $80,000 in personal debt she was desperate to hide. My retired forensic psychologist ally was waiting in the wings. This time, their insidious campaign of alienation wouldn't just unravel. It would be exposed for what it truly was. My family would be reclaimed, and authentic connections would be restored, proving that truth and love can triumph over even the most sophisticated manipulation. The 3 days that followed James's devastating phone call felt like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I had spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Rachel, searching my memory for some explanation of how my love and concern for my family had been transformed into evidence of toxicity and interference. On Friday morning, I gathered every ounce of courage I possessed and drove to James and Rachel's house, the beautiful suburban home I had helped them purchase, where I had spent countless holidays creating warm memories with my grandchildren. I needed to look my son in the eyes, to have a real conversation without Rachel's influence, to make him understand that everything Rachel was telling him about me was a deliberate distortion of reality. But when I arrived, the house was dark and empty, their cars gone from the driveway. I sat in my car for over an hour, hoping they would return, rehearsing the words I wanted to say to James about our relationship, about the mother I had always tried to be for him. That's when my phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, and my heart leaped with hope that maybe he was calling to invite me in to talk through this misunderstanding like the loving family we had always been. Instead, his voice was cold and strained in a way I had never heard before. "Mom, I can see you sitting outside our house. This is exactly what Rachel was talking about. You can't just show up uninvited anymore. Rachel feels that you're too interfering, that you've ruined the peace in our home, and frankly, I agree with her assessment." The words hit me like physical blows. This was my son, the boy I had raised with such care and devotion, speaking to me as if I were a stranger, a threat to be managed rather than a mother to be loved. "James," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I just want to understand what's happening. I've never tried to interfere with your marriage. I've always respected Rachel's role as Emily and Ethan's mother. Please, can we just talk about this face to face?" "No, Mom," he said firmly. "Rachel and I have discussed this extensively, and we've decided that you're no longer welcome in our home without Rachel's express permission. Your visits have become a burden, and your constant criticism and judgment are affecting our children's emotional well-being. We need space from your negativity." The phone went dead, leaving me sitting in my car outside the house where I had once been welcomed with hugs and laughter, now branded as an unwelcome intruder whose very presence was harmful to the people I loved most. That evening, as I sat alone in my empty house surrounded by decades of family photographs I had lovingly taken and preserved, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. What I heard when I played that message changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. It was Rachel's voice, obviously unaware that she was being recorded by my phone's automatic voicemail system. Her words were venomous, filled with a hatred that took my breath away. "You old hag, you're ruining my marriage with your constant meddling and possessiveness. James is my husband now, not your little boy. You have no humanity, no understanding of what a modern family needs." But it was what came next that revealed the true motivation behind this campaign of destruction. "I have a personal debt of $80,000 that I need to pay off, and your constant visits and expectations are costing me money I don't have. Every time you come around, James feels guilty and wants to help you or include you in things that cost us money we need for other purposes." The chilling clarity of that moment was overwhelming. This wasn't about my behavior or my relationship with my grandchildren. This was about money, about Rachel's financial desperation, and her need to eliminate any competition for James's resources and attention. Over the next several days, the campaign against me intensified with calculated precision. James began avoiding my calls entirely, letting them go straight to voicemail. When I tried to attend Emily's soccer game, something I had done every weekend for 3 years, Rachel intercepted me in the parking lot with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Nancy," she said loudly enough for other parents to hear, "I've asked you repeatedly to respect our family's boundaries. Emily is uncomfortable with your presence, and we've decided that your attendance at her activities is no longer appropriate." Emily, my sweet granddaughter, who had once run to me with excitement after every game, stood beside her mother looking confused and uncomfortable. But when Rachel nudged her, Emily dutifully repeated the words she had obviously been coached to say, "Go away. Grandma, Mom says you're toxic and that you make people unhappy." The other parents stared at me with a mixture of pity and judgment, clearly believing they were witnessing a grandmother whose mental state had deteriorated to the point where she was disrupting her own family's peace. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the heartbreak of seeing my beloved granddaughter used as a weapon against me. Ethan's reaction was even more crushing. When I encountered him at the grocery store with one of his friends, he actually laughed and said loudly, "Oh, great, it's my crazy grandma. Mom says she's losing her mind and can't take a hint. His friend looked embarrassed, but Ethan seemed to enjoy the attention his cruelty brought him. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose school plays I had photographed with pride and joy. Now he was treating me like I was some pathetic stranger deserving of mockery. Brenda, Rachel's sister, began what could only be described as a social media campaign designed to isolate me completely from our extended family and community. She posted carefully crafted messages about the importance of protecting family peace and recognizing when elderly relatives need professional help rather than enabling their unhealthy attachments. The messages never mentioned me by name, but anyone who knew our family understood exactly who she was talking about. The comments that followed were devastating, friends and relatives expressing their concern for James and Rachel, their admiration for how patiently they were handling a difficult situation, their understanding of how challenging it can be when aging parents lose perspective. Within 2 weeks, I had been transformed from a beloved grandmother and respected member of our community into a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly people become obsessed with their adult children's lives. The formal notice that arrived from Mr. Davies, Rachel's lawyer, was the final assault on my dignity and my rights as a grandmother. The letter, written in cold legal language, demanded that I cease all attempts to contact or visit the Martinez family, and warned that any further harassment would result in legal action and possible criminal charges. Reading those words, I realized that Rachel's campaign had been far more sophisticated than I had initially understood. She hadn't just turned my family against me emotionally. She had created a legal framework that made my love for my grandchildren a criminal offense. As I sat in my empty house that night, surrounded by 40 years of family photographs that now felt like evidence of a life that had been erased, I felt something I had never experienced in 69 years of living complete and utter defeat. But beneath that despair, something else was beginning to grow, a cold, determined anger that reminded me of every challenge I had ever overcome in my professional and personal life. The woman who had built a successful business from nothing, who had raised a son as a single mother, who had weathered every storm life had thrown at her, was not going to be destroyed by lies and manipulation. Not without a fight. The isolation that followed the legal notice was more complete and devastating than anything I could have imagined. Rachel's campaign of alienation escalated from cutting off my access to my son and grandchildren to systematically erasing me from every aspect of their lives as if I had never existed at all. The cruelest blow came when I learned that Emily was having a birthday party, her 13th birthday, a milestone I had been looking forward to celebrating with her for months. I only found out about it through a neighbor who mentioned seeing all the decorations and guests at James's house. When I called to ask why I hadn't been invited, Rachel answered the phone with icy satisfaction. "Nancy, I thought we had made this clear. You're too toxic for family celebrations. Emily specifically asked that you not be included because your presence makes her anxious and uncomfortable. We're trying to create positive memories for our children, not burden them with your negativity." The idea that my granddaughter, who had once begged me to photograph every moment of her life, had specifically requested my absence was so painful that I could barely breathe. But I knew Rachel well enough by now to understand that Emily had been coached, manipulated, perhaps even threatened, to ensure her compliance with this narrative. Brenda's social media posts during this period were like salt in an open wound. She shared dozens of photos from the birthday party, carefully curated images that showed James, Rachel, and the children laughing and celebrating in what she described as peaceful family harmony. The caption that accompanied the photos was particularly cruel. So grateful for the positive energy in our family now. Sometimes removing negative influences is the most loving thing you can do for children. The message was clear to anyone who knew our situation. My absence had improved their lives. My love had been a burden they were relieved to shed. But it was during this period of devastating isolation that I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I understood about Rachel's motivations. While organizing my computer files, I came across screenshots I had taken months earlier of Rachel's social media posts back when we still had a cordial relationship, and I followed her accounts to keep up with my grandchildren's activities. Comparing those older posts to her current ones revealed a disturbing pattern. In the early posts, I appeared regularly in family photos, usually holding one of the children or helping with some activity. The captions were warm and inclusive. So grateful for Grandma Nancy's help with the kids, and Emily loves spending time with her photographer grandma. But then gradually I began disappearing from the photos even before our open conflict began. More telling, Rachel had gone back and deleted or edited many of those earlier posts, removing evidence of my involvement in their family life and replacing them with new captions that suggested the children were happier and more peaceful without outside influences. The most chilling discovery came when I found a post from just 2 weeks ago featuring a photo of Emily that I had actually taken during one of our last visits together. Rachel had cropped me out of the image and posted it with the caption, "My beautiful daughter is finally free from negative influences. So much peace and joy in our home now that we've learned to set healthy boundaries." That was the moment I understood the true scope of what Rachel was doing. She wasn't just excluding me from their current life. She was systematically rewriting our family history, erasing evidence of the love and connection that had existed between me and my grandchildren for over a decade. The realization that my granddaughter's own mother was stealing and manipulating images I had created, turning my gifts of love into weapons against me, was almost unbearable. But it also awakened something fierce and protective in my photographer's soul, a recognition that this was not just personal cruelty, but a form of theft and fraud that deserved to be exposed. It was during this dark period that a memory I had buried for over 15 years began to surface, triggered by the stress and the constant feeling that my love was being turned against me. The memory involved a secret I had kept to protect James, a sacrifice so profound that even now, thinking about it, made my hands shake with a mixture of grief and anger. James had been 28 when it happened, working as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm and building what seemed like a promising career. What nobody knew, not even James himself, fully understood at the time, was that he had become involved in what could only be described as insider trading. A senior colleague had been feeding him information about upcoming mergers and acquisitions, and James had been making small but consistent profits by trading on that information. When the SEC investigation began, James panicked. The potential consequences were devastating criminal charges, imprisonment, the complete destruction of his professional reputation and financial future. But what terrified him most was the thought that Rachel, who was pregnant with Emily at the time, would leave him if she discovered the extent of his legal troubles. I found out about the investigation by accident when a detective called my house looking for James and mentioned enough details for me to piece together what was happening. The next 24 hours were the most intensive of my life as I used every skill I had developed as a photographer and researcher to understand the situation and develop a strategy to protect my son. Using my connections in the legal and financial communities, clients whose family portraits I had taken over the years, I quietly hired the best white-collar criminal defense attorney in the state. But more importantly, I began documenting and creating evidence that would establish James's innocence. I spent $75,000 of my own savings money I had been carefully saving for my retirement to pay restitution to the firms that had been affected by the trading. I worked with the attorney to create a narrative that made James appear to be an unwitting victim of his colleague's scheme rather than an active participant. Most significantly, I used my photographer's skills with image editing and documentation to create a false timeline of James's activities during the crucial period. I doctored photos, altered timestamps, and even created fake receipts and documents that provided James with alibis for the times when the illegal trades had been made. The strategy worked. James was cleared of criminal charges, though he lost his job and was banned from working in securities for 5 years. But he never knew the full extent of what I had done to save him. I told him only that I had helped pay for his legal defense, not that I had essentially committed fraud myself to protect him from the consequences of his choices. I kept this secret for 15 years, watching James rebuild his career and create a beautiful family, never wanting him to know the price I had paid to give him that second chance. The irony was devastating. I had compromised my own integrity and spent my life savings to protect James from the consequences of his poor judgment. And now his wife was using my love against me, claiming that my presence in their lives was toxic and harmful. When I tried to subtly reference this sacrifice during one of our last phone conversations, hoping to remind James of how much I had always been willing to do for his happiness and well-being, his response was like a knife to my heart. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Your past choices are your own business. Rachel says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality, and I'm starting to think she's right." Rachel's voice was audible in the background, and I could hear her feeding him lines. "Tell her that we're worried about her mental health, that she's becoming paranoid and trying to twist history to make us look bad." The cruelest moment came when Ethan got on the phone, clearly coached by his parents, but delivering his lines with an enthusiasm that suggested he was enjoying his role in my destruction. "Grandma, you're acting crazy. Mom and Dad say you're getting old and confused. Why don't you just stop bothering us and go away? Maybe you should just die already and leave us alone." The casual cruelty of those words, coming from the mouth of a child I had loved unconditionally since the moment he was born, was almost unbearable. But it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just about Rachel's financial problems or her need for control. This was about something much darker, a systematic campaign to erase me from my family's life and memory. The formal proposal that arrived from Mr. Davies a week later confirmed my worst fears about the scope of their plan. The document, dressed up in legal language about family harmony and therapeutic intervention, was actually a comprehensive strategy to eliminate me from my grandchildren's lives permanently. The proposed solution required me to sign a binding agreement permanently relinquishing all grandparent visitation rights and submitting to a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation designed to establish my mental incompetence. In return, James and Rachel would graciously allow me to send supervised pre-approved letters to Emily and Ethan twice a year, subject to their review and editing. Reading that document, I understood that I was facing something far more sinister than a family dispute. This was a calculated legal and psychological assault designed to destroy my identity as a grandmother and reduce me to the status of a dangerous stranger who needed to be managed and controlled. The choice before me was stark surrender my dignity and my rights and accept a role as a monitored outsider in my own family's life, or fight back against people who had already proven they were willing to use my love for my grandchildren as a weapon against me. As I sat in my study that night, surrounded by decades of family photographs that now felt like evidence of a life that was being systematically erased, I knew there was really no choice at all. Some relationships are worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. Some truths are too important to remain buried, and some battles, no matter how painful, must be fought, because the alternative is the slow death of everything that makes life worth living. The letter that would finalize my banishment from my family arrived on a cold March morning, delivered by certified mail, with all the bureaucratic efficiency designed to make me feel like a legal problem rather than a heartbroken grandmother. Mr. Davis's letterhead gleamed at the top of the page as I read words that completed the transformation of my love into a criminal offense. Dear Mrs. Nancy Harrison, it began using my formal name as if I were a stranger rather than the woman who had helped raise the children who were now rejecting me. After careful consideration and extensive consultation with our clients, we are formally notifying you that all grandparent visitation rights have been permanently terminated, effective immediately. The legal language that followed was designed to be as devastating as possible. The court had accepted their motion for a temporary restraining order based on what they characterized as my pattern of harassment and increasingly erratic behavior related to what they termed my toxic influence on the family's emotional well-being. Most chilling of all, I was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my grandchildren, their home, or their school. Any violation would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The letter concluded with a paragraph that was clearly meant to destroy any remaining hope I might have harbored. Our clients have made this difficult decision solely in the best interests of their minor children, who have been demonstrably harmed by your inability to respect appropriate boundaries. I read those words over and over, each repetition driving the knife deeper into my heart. My own family had characterized my love for them as harmful to children, my presence as so toxic that it required legal intervention to protect Emily and Ethan from their own grandmother. But I wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. The photographer in me understood that sometimes the most powerful communication happens not through words, but through images that capture the truth of relationships and preserve moments of genuine connection. I spent hours creating a small, intimate photo album that told the story of my relationship with Emily and Ethan from their births to the present. Pictures of their first steps, their first days of school, their birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Images of Emily carefully arranging flowers while I taught her about composition, and lighting photos of Ethan proudly showing me his latest school project while I captured his excitement with my camera. Each photograph was a piece of evidence that contradicted Rachel's narrative of toxicity and harm. These were images of love, joy, safety, and connection. They showed children who were comfortable, happy, and secure in their grandmother's presence, not traumatized victims in need of protection. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto the pages in handwriting that shook with emotion and desperation. I reminded them of the countless moments we had shared, the adventures we had taken together, the way they used to run to me with excitement whenever I arrived for a visit. My dearest Emily and Ethan. I wrote, I know that things are confusing right now, and I know that the adults in your life are telling you different stories about who I am and what my love means. But I want you to look at these pictures and remember the truth of our relationship. Remember the grandmother who taught you to see beauty in everyday moments, who listened to your stories and dreams, who loved you unconditionally from the moment you came into this world. Late one evening, I drove to James's house and left the album on their doorstep, hoping that when they saw those captured moments of genuine happiness and connection, something in their hearts might remember the truth beneath the lies they had been told. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that my gesture might reach whatever love remained in my family's hearts. I imagined Emily looking through the photos and remembering the special bond we had shared, Ethan recognizing the woman who had always celebrated his achievements and supported his dreams. Then I saw Brenda's social media post, and my world collapsed completely. The photograph showed my carefully crafted album, torn into pieces, its pages scattered across what looked like a garbage bin. The photos I had chosen so carefully, images of Emily's wonder as she learned to use my camera, pictures of Ethan's pride as he posed for portraits, memories of birthday parties and family holidays, had been deliberately destroyed and discarded like worthless trash. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter." Some people just can't let go of the past and keep trying to manipulate family members with old photos and guilt trips. Time to move forward from negativity and toxic behavior. Healthy boundaries. Family first, moving on. Seeing those irreplaceable memories, those moments of pure love and joy destroyed and thrown away like garbage, was more than my heart could bear. I collapsed onto my kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the full weight of their cruelty crashed over me. The realization that my own son had not only permitted but actively participated in this ultimate act of erasure was devastating beyond words. James's response was swift and merciless. Within hours of Brenda's post, my phone buzzed with a text message that was crueler than anything Rachel had ever said directly. "Consider this closed, Mom. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your obsession and your inability to accept reality. We're done with your manipulation." But even that wasn't enough for Rachel. She began calling our mutual friends and distant relatives, spreading a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as mentally unstable and dangerously fixated on controlling my adult son's family. She spoke with the practiced concern of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times, expressing her worry about my mental health and her fear for her children's safety. The cruelest blow of all came when I encountered Emily at the grocery store, accompanied by one of her friends from school. When she saw me approaching, Emily's face hardened with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of contempt and disgust that looked unnatural on her 13-year-old features. "Oh, great, it's the crazy lady again," she said loudly enough for other shoppers to hear. "Mom warned me you might try to bother me in public. Why don't you just leave us alone? You're embarrassing yourself and everyone around you." Her friend looked uncomfortable and confused, but Emily seemed to enjoy the attention her cruelty brought her. This was the child I had taught to appreciate beauty, whose artistic talents I had nurtured, whose confidence I had built through years of patient encouragement and unconditional love. Watching my granddaughter perform this rehearsed rejection was the most devastating moment of the entire ordeal. It wasn't just the loss of our relationship that broke my heart. It was the realization that Rachel had succeeded in transforming a loving, sensitive child into someone capable of such calculated cruelty. It was then, in my deepest despair, that I finally revealed the most devastating secret of my past to Dr. Sarah Williams, the family therapist who had become my lifeline during this nightmare. The weight of keeping this burden alone had become unbearable, and Sarah's compassionate, non-judgmental presence finally gave me the courage to speak the truth I had hidden for over 8 years. There's something about Emily that makes Rachel's campaign even more heartbreaking. I began my voice barely above a whisper. Something I've never told anyone, something I promised myself I would take to my grave to protect her. Sarah waited patiently as I gathered the courage to continue her gentle presence, giving me the strength to finally break the silence that had protected my granddaughter's innocence for so long. When Emily was 5 years old, she witnessed something that could have damaged her entire sense of safety and trust in the world. We were at a community event, and there was an incident involving the school principal, a man everyone respected and trusted. Emily saw him having what we now understand was a severe mental health crisis, becoming violent and frightening in a very public way. The words came out in a rush, decades of suppressed guilt and protective instinct finally finding voice. Emily was traumatized. She couldn't sleep, couldn't go to school without panic attacks, couldn't trust any adult authority figure. The incident was kept quiet by the school district, but Emily's memories of what she saw were destroying her childhood. Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes as the full implications of what I was telling her became clear. I made a decision that has haunted me ever since. I continued, tears streaming down my face. I used my skills as a photographer and digital artist to create a false narrative of that day. I doctored photos, created fake timelines, and essentially gaslit my own granddaughter into believing that her traumatic memories were just nightmares or imagination. I told Sarah about the months I had spent carefully reconstructing Emily's memory of that day, replacing her true recollections with a fabricated story that painted the principal as a hero who had helped children during a minor emergency. I described how I had used my professional expertise in image manipulation to create photographic evidence that supported this false narrative. I spent thousands of dollars on therapy and specialists, but what really healed Emily was my lie. I convinced her that her traumatic memories were false, that she had imagined the worst parts of what she had seen. I sacrificed my own commitment to truth and integrity to give her back her childhood innocence. The cosmic irony was unbearable. Emily's current ability to reject me with such cold efficiency to participate in Rachel's campaign of lies and manipulation was built on the foundation of my own willingness to distort reality to protect her emotional well-being. I taught her that memories could be false, that adults could reshape reality to make children feel better, I whispered. And now, Rachel is using that same vulnerability against me, convincing Emily that her loving memories of our relationship were just manipulation, that my care and attention were actually forms of abuse. The silence in Sarah's office was profound as the weight of my confession settled between us. I had protected Emily from one trauma by creating a situation that made her vulnerable to another kind of manipulation entirely. My deepest act of love and sacrifice had been turned into the weapon that was now destroying both of us. The betrayal was complete, the irony devastating, and the price of my protective love higher than I had ever imagined it could be. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else, a cold, determined clarity about what needed to happen next. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Some truths are too important to remain buried. And some fights for the integrity of family relationships are worth having, no matter what they cost or who gets hurt in the process. The real battle for my family's soul was about to begin. In the weeks that followed the restraining order and the revelation of my devastating secret to Dr. Williams, I found myself trapped in a psychological prison more terrifying than any physical confinement I could have imagined. The weight of Emily's buried trauma combined with the legal prohibition against contacting my own family, created a suffocating isolation that pressed down on me like a living nightmare. Every morning, I would wake up in my small apartment and remember anew that I was utterly alone with the truth, the monumental secret of what I had done to protect Emily's childhood innocence, burned inside me like acid eating away at my sense of reality and purpose. For 43 years, I had been a family photographer, someone who captured truth and preserved authentic moments for others to cherish. Now I was drowning in the most profound moral crisis of my life, questioning every choice I had made and wondering if my love had somehow become a form of harm. The isolation was made infinitely worse by Rachel and Brenda's systematic campaign to destroy not just my family relationships, but my entire professional legacy as well. What I didn't realize at first was how methodically they were working to obliterate every aspect of my identity and credibility. Brenda began what she called a wellness initiative regarding my mental state, subtly contacting photography associations and family counseling networks with carefully crafted concerns about my declining emotional stability. She painted a picture of a once respected photographer who was now experiencing severe cognitive deterioration, someone who had developed unhealthy emotional attachments to her own work and was no longer capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries with clients. Nancy Harrison has been exhibiting increasingly problematic behavior, she would say in her professional, concerned tone. Her family has been forced to seek legal protection due to her obsessive fixation on controlling their narrative through manipulated imagery. There are serious questions about her ability to maintain the ethical standards required for working with vulnerable families. The impact was swift and devastating. Quietly, without any formal announcement, I began receiving polite but firm cancellations from art galleries where my work had been scheduled to appear. Photography groups stopped including me in their exhibitions. A retrospective of my career that had been planned by the local arts council suddenly found budget constraints that made my participation impossible. My reputation for highly perceptive observation and artistic integrity, built over 4 decades of careful work and ethical practice, was being systematically obliterated. Colleagues who had once admired my ability to capture authentic family dynamics now avoided my calls. The photography studio where I had taught workshops for 15 years treated me like a pariah, as if my very presence might contaminate their reputation for professional excellence. The financial consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against Rachel's defamation lawsuit and fighting the visitation termination completely drained my modest savings account. When James reported concerns about my financial management to protect me from myself, my bank accounts were frozen, pending investigation into my supposed mental incompetence. The eviction notice came on a bitter April morning. I stared at the legal document, written in the same cold clinical language as the restraining order, and realized that I was about to lose the last physical connection to my independent life. Within 30 days, my cherished home, filled with decades of family photographs and the accumulated treasures of a lifetime dedicated to preserving precious moments, would be sold at public auction to cover my legal debts. The day of the auction was the most humiliating experience of my 69 years. I stood across the street, watching strangers rifle through my possessions, putting price tags on items that held immeasurable personal and artistic value. My professional cameras, my darkroom equipment, the thousands of family portraits that represented years of capturing love and connection. Everything was reduced to lots and dollar amounts sold to the highest bidder. I ended up in a crowded, impersonal public shelter, sleeping on a narrow cot, surrounded by people whose circumstances had stripped them of dignity, just as mine had been stripped from me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, who had spent my life creating beautiful images of family harmony, was now among society's forgotten and discarded. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, and it involved the two people I loved most in the world, my grandchildren, Emily and Ethan. James and Rachel, with Brenda's calculating guidance, decided to leverage my grandchildren in what they called a Healthy Family Dynamics Awareness Campaign. They connected with a well-funded local counseling center that was launching an initiative about protecting children from toxic family relationships. I learned about it the same way the rest of the world did, through a professionally produced video that went viral on social media. The setting was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture designed to make the speakers appear trustworthy and sympathetic. Emily, now 12 and looking heartbreakingly mature, stood beside a display about emotional wellness and delivered a rehearsed speech about navigating difficult family relationships. Sometimes, she said, looking directly into the camera with my own eyes, we have to protect ourselves from people who say they love us, but actually make us feel confused and scared. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is create boundaries with family members who can't respect our feelings. The words were clearly not her own, but hearing them in her voice, seeing her used as a spokesperson to legitimize her family's rejection of me, shattered something fundamental inside me. Ethan's contribution was even more devastating in its calculated innocence. The 10-year-old I had taught to appreciate composition, and lighting stood beside a drawing he had made of a happy family. The picture showed James, Rachel, Emily, and himself all smiling and holding hands under a bright sun. I was nowhere to be found. This is what family looks like when everyone feels safe, he said, his voice sweet and confident. When we don't have to worry about people who try to control us or make us feel guilty for being happy. The video ended with a message about the importance of recognizing toxic family patterns and the courage required to break cycles of emotional manipulation. My own grandchildren had been turned into weapons against me, their innocent faces used to legitimize a narrative that painted my love as a form of psychological abuse. I spent that night on my narrow shelter cot, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how people lost their minds. The psychological torture of being legally separated from my family while watching them use my most precious relationships against me was almost unbearable. But just when I thought I had reached the bottom of despair, an unexpected lifeline appeared. The letter arrived at the shelter forwarded from my old address. It was from Mrs. Dorothy Chen, an elderly client whose family portraits I had taken nearly 20 years ago when her grandchildren were small. She was now in her 80s, and she had seen news coverage of my legal troubles. Dear Nancy, she wrote, I don't understand all the details of what's happening with your family, but I know your character. The woman who captured the love in my family's eyes, who saw the beauty in our ordinary moments and made them extraordinary, could never be the person they're describing in the news. She included a check for $20,000 and the contact information for a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse and family manipulation cases. These people understand how families can be turned into weapons, she wrote. Let them help you fight for the truth. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the fierce determination that had carried me through 43 years of building a career and raising a family as a single mother. I was not going to let Rachel's lies destroy everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, everything that made life worth living. The war was far from over, but I finally had allies who understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about family relationships or grandparent rights. This was about the fundamental question of whether truth and authentic love could survive when confronted by organized deception and calculated manipulation. The next phase of Rachel and James's campaign against me was so audacious, so perfectly calculated to destroy everything I held sacred that I might have admired its thoroughness if it hadn't been aimed at obliterating my life's work and artistic legacy. Using James's social standing in the local business community and a network of cultural figures whose ethics had been compromised by financial interests and social ambition, Rachel orchestrated something truly diabolical, a highly publicized exhibition called Family History and Authenticity, Moving Beyond Idealized Narratives. The event was scheduled to take place at the very gallery where my work had been featured for over a decade, in the space where I had celebrated countless artistic achievements and milestones. The exhibition claimed to address the growing problem of manipulated family narratives in modern photography, particularly involving elderly photographers who might be suffering from emotional attachment issues that compromise their ability to capture authentic family dynamics. James was announced as the keynote speaker billed as a family history expert who had overcome the challenges of idealized documentation to find authentic truth in his family's story. When Mrs. Chen learned about the exhibition through her contacts in the arts community, I felt physically ill. Rachel and James were using my own professional arena, my own artistic legacy, as the stage for my public execution. They were turning the very gallery where I had taught countless families to appreciate the beauty of authentic connection into a platform for promoting the opposite message. I managed to watch the live stream from a computer at the public library, sitting in a corner where the other patrons couldn't see the tears streaming down my face. James took the stage, looking distinguished and confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I had spent on food in 6 months. His presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation. Without ever mentioning my name directly, he told the story of an elderly family photographer whose obsession with creating perfect narratives had made it impossible for her to accept the authentic complexities of modern family relationships. He described how this woman's beautiful but unrealistic expectations had nearly destroyed a loving family's ability to embrace genuine truth and healthy boundaries. Sometimes, James said, his voice carrying the perfect tone of sad wisdom, our artistic training becomes a prison. We become so attached to idealized images of family harmony that we lose sight of the practical realities of protecting children from emotional manipulation. This particular case study shows how dangerous it can be when someone confuses photographic fantasy with genuine family love. The audience of family counselors, social workers, and arts educators nodded knowingly. Here was a man who understood the real world, who could see past the romantic delusions that trapped lesser minds. But the knife twisted deeper when Rachel took the stage for a panel discussion on recognizing manipulation in family documentation. She spoke about me with the practiced sympathy of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you care about become increasingly disconnected from reality, she said, her voice heavy with false concern. Nancy's photographs were always beautiful, but as she's gotten older, they've become more and more about her own emotional needs rather than authentic family representation. She simply cannot accept that families sometimes need boundaries, that not every moment needs to be preserved and celebrated. The moderator asked gentle leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing artistic obsession combined with cognitive decline. Rachel painted a picture of a family torn apart by one person's inability to accept that their vision of perfect family unity was actually a form of control and manipulation. But the most devastating moment came when they showed a pre-recorded video featuring Emily, now 12 and clearly uncomfortable, but going through with her scripted lines anyway. My beloved granddaughter, the child whose artistic eye I had helped develop, spoke about her growing understanding of authentic family relationships and the importance of moving beyond pretty lies to find real truth. My grandmother taught me about photography. She said, her voice carefully neutral, but I've learned that taking beautiful pictures doesn't mean you understand what families really need. Sometimes people hide behind their cameras instead of dealing with real problems. Real love means respecting boundaries, not trying to capture everything. The implicit message was clear. Nancy's artistic vision was naive, romantic fantasy disconnected from the practical realities of healthy family functioning. Even her own granddaughter had outgrown her grandmother's outdated approach to family relationships. The final twist of the knife came in a short video clip featuring Ethan, now 10, and giggling as he pointed at one of my old professional cameras. "Grandma used this old thing," he said, laughing. "So ancient, we prefer real photos. Now, not all that fake studio stuff." The audience chuckled appreciatively. Here was the next generation freed from the artificial constraints that had trapped their elder, ready to embrace more authentic approaches to family documentation. I sat in that library chair, watching my life's work being systematically dismantled and used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of artistic delusion. The irony was unbearable. James and Rachel, a family whose very existence had been preserved and celebrated through my artistic vision, were being hailed as experts in authentic family relationships. But just as I was about to close the laptop and flee from this nightmare, something unexpected happened. The camera panned across the audience, and I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Marcus Williams, a retired photo editor who had worked with me on dozens of family portrait projects over the years. Marcus looked disgusted. His face showed the same expression of revulsion I remembered from editorial meetings when someone would propose compromising artistic integrity for commercial gain. He was shaking his head, clearly seeing through the elaborate performance being staged on that platform. After the exhibition ended, I received an email that gave me the first real hope I had felt in weeks. Marcus had tracked down my contact information through Mrs. Chen and reached out to express his outrage at what he had witnessed. "Nancy," he wrote, "what I saw tonight was an abomination. Whoever orchestrated that event has turned artistic discourse into a weapon against truth and creative integrity. I don't know the details of your family situation, but I know your work, and I know when I'm watching a character assassination dressed up as cultural criticism." He offered something precious, a professional affidavit, vouching for my impeccable artistic judgment and mental acuity based on decades of professional collaboration. More importantly, he put me in touch with Dr. Williams, sharing his suspicions that something much darker was happening behind the scenes. Marcus had been quietly investigating the funding sources for the Family History and Authenticity exhibition, and what he had discovered was disturbing. The event had been financially backed by several counseling organizations with documented histories of promoting parental alienation strategies, groups that used academic-sounding language to disguise fundamentally manipulative therapeutic approaches. "Your family isn't just attacking you personally, Nancy," he wrote. "They've allied themselves with people who represent everything you've spent your career fighting against. This isn't about family dynamics anymore. This is about whether artistic truth can survive when it's attacked by organized deception. The fight for my principles, my reputation, and my family's integrity had just gained a powerful new dimension. The truth was finally beginning to find champions who could help me expose the elaborate network of lies and manipulation that had consumed my life. The final financial assault came with the precision of a military operation coordinated across multiple fronts to ensure my complete destruction. James, with Rachel's full support and Brenda's strategic guidance, launched what he called his comprehensive resolution, a devastating legal and financial attack designed to render me not just homeless, but utterly powerless to continue fighting for the truth. The lawsuit arrived like a thunderbolt so massive in scope that even my battle-hardened legal allies were stunned by its audacity. James filed a $1 million claim against me for emotional distress, intentional damage to family reputation, and elder harassment stemming from what he characterized as my prolonged campaign of psychological manipulation against their family's well-being and stability. The legal documents crafted by Mr. Davies with surgical precision painted me as a vindictive old woman who had orchestrated a systematic campaign of emotional terrorism against her own family. They cited my obsessive fixation on maintaining control over their narrative, my delusional insistence on my version of family history, and my manipulative attempts to force continued contact with unwilling family members. But the lawsuit was only the beginning. While I was scrambling to find legal representation, I couldn't afford James launched a parallel attack on my remaining professional standing and financial security. He contacted my former photography associations and retirement fund administrators with what he called grave concerns about my mental competence and my fitness to manage my own financial affairs. His evidence was compelling to anyone who didn't know the full story. He presented the restraining order as proof of my dangerous instability. He shared carefully edited recordings of our conversations that made my desperate pleas for understanding sound like the rambling threats of an unhinged person. He even provided testimony from Rachel about their growing concerns over my increasingly paranoid behavior and my inability to distinguish between professional documentation and personal fantasy. Nancy Harrison has become fixated on the idea that her artistic vision represents objective truth, James told the Retirement Board Review Committee. She's lost the ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, and our family is genuinely concerned about her capacity to make sound financial decisions. The result was swift and devastating. The Photography Association's pension board, citing concerns about potential liability and maintaining professional integrity, voted to permanently revoke my retirement benefits. They characterized their decision as protecting the organization from association with someone who had been legally determined to be a threat to her own family and whose artistic judgment had been called into serious question. My professional honors, accumulated over 4 decades of distinguished work, were quietly stripped away under a clause about conduct inconsistent with professional standards. The gallery that had represented my work for 15 years removed my pieces from their permanent collection, erasing 40 years of artistic contribution as if I had never existed. Within 3 months, I went from having a modest but secure retirement income to being completely destitute. The legal fees from defending against James's massive lawsuit consumed the emergency fund Mrs. Chen had helped me establish. The loss of my pension eliminated any hope of long-term financial stability. The eviction from my temporary shelter accommodation came on a sweltering July morning, timed with cruel precision to ensure maximum humiliation. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to be present, ostensibly covering a story about housing challenges for seniors with mental health issues. The footage that aired on the evening news showed me standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, a formerly respected artist reduced to visible homelessness. The reporter's voiceover was devastating. "This is Nancy Harrison, a retired family photographer whose legal troubles and family disputes have led to housing instability. Local social services are working to provide support for seniors who may be struggling with the complex challenges of family estrangement and financial management." I watched myself on that television screen, standing in the heat, with everything I owned in trash bags, and barely recognized the broken woman I had become. The dignified artist, who had once been celebrated for capturing family love, had been transformed into a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly people become obsessed with controlling their adult children's lives. James and Lisa's response to my homelessness was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire ordeal. When reporters asked James about his mother's situation, he delivered a statement that Rachel had clearly crafted for maximum impact. "My mother is struggling with some difficult personal and professional issues right now," he said, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. "We've tried to help her understand that her artistic vision doesn't always align with healthy family dynamics, but sometimes you have to accept that you can't change someone's perspective. I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to acknowledge the damage her behavior has caused to our family." Lisa's response was even more calculated in its cruelty. She posted on social media about her incredibly busy schedule with her own family obligations, subtly implying that my problems were self-created drama that she simply didn't have time to deal with. When she encountered me on the street near the shelter, she literally looked away and crossed to the other side, unable or unwilling to face the suffering she had helped enable. But the cruelest twist of all came when Brenda decided to celebrate their victory with a gesture so audacious that it took my breath away. Using money that she and Rachel had obtained through manipulating my frozen retirement accounts, my entire $150,000 life savings that had been deemed at risk due to my supposed mental incompetence, she made a highly publicized purchase of professional photography equipment for Rachel. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media as a heartwarming story of family members supporting each other's artistic pursuits. Brenda stood beside a gleaming array of cameras and lighting equipment, smiling for photographers as she spoke about the importance of authentic family documentation and moving beyond manipulative imagery. "This equipment will help Rachel capture real family moments," she announced. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is invest in truth-telling rather than fantasy creation. We're so proud of Rachel's commitment to honest family photography." The photographs were shared widely on social media, transforming my stolen legacy into a trophy celebrating their artistic integrity and family values. They had taken my life savings, used it to destroy my reputation, and then turned it into a monument to their own righteousness. The physical toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in late July, as I was walking from the shelter to the library, where I spent my days researching legal options I couldn't afford to pursue, my chest exploded with pain and the world went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital intensive care unit connected to machines that were apparently keeping me alive. The doctor, a kind woman about Rachel's age, explained that I had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by severe stress and malnutrition. My body, she said gently, had simply reached its breaking point. As I lay there in that hospital bed, floating in and out of consciousness, I experienced something that felt like a vivid dream, but somehow more real than my waking life. I was back in my studio 15 years earlier, setting up for a family portrait session with James, Rachel, and baby Emily. In the dream, I was watching Rachel through my camera lens, and I suddenly saw something I had missed at the time. While James was playing with Emily, making her laugh for the camera, Rachel was standing behind him, making subtle gestures, controlling his movements, manipulating his expressions. She was literally directing the scene, making him perform the role of happy father, while she orchestrated every moment. The memory was so vivid, so clearly a real moment, that I had unconsciously registered, but never consciously processed. Rachel's manipulation hadn't started recently. It had been going on for over a decade, hidden in plain sight, while I focused on capturing what I thought was genuine family joy. When I fully regained consciousness, I understood with crystalline clarity what my subconscious was trying to tell me. This entire nightmare, this systematic destruction of my family and my life, was just the latest phase of a pattern that had been developing for years. Rachel's control over James, her need to eliminate any competing influence or alternative narrative, had been building toward this moment of complete dominance for longer than I had ever imagined. The memory of that portrait session ignited something fierce and unbreakable in my chest, something that the heart attack couldn't touch. I was going to fight back, not just for my own vindication or my family's redemption, but for the truth itself. Some lies are too big to remain hidden, and some patterns of manipulation are too dangerous to go unchallenged. From my hospital bed, slowly recovering from the heart attack that had nearly ended my fight before it truly began, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The machines monitoring my vital signs beeped steadily as I dictated what I knew might be my final message to the world. With the help of Maria Rodriguez, the compassionate nurse who had become my unlikely ally, I recorded a video that contained everything I had been legally prohibited from saying. In that raw emotional recording, I detailed Rachel's ruthless campaign of manipulation, Brenda's calculated exploitation of family relationships, and the systematic way they had weaponized my love for my grandchildren against me. I played the unedited audio recordings I had secretly made of Rachel's vicious voicemails, her explicit statements about needing to eliminate my toxic influence, and her chilling admission about her $80,000 debt that was driving her desperation. But most importantly, I spoke directly to James, appealing to whatever conscience might still exist beneath the layers of manipulation and control that had consumed him. I reminded him of the man his father had been, of the values we had tried to instill in him, as a child of the loving relationship we had shared before Rachel's campaign began. James, I said, looking directly into the camera with whatever strength I had left, I know you're listening to other voices now, but somewhere inside you, you know the truth. You know I never tried to control or manipulate your family. You know my love for you and your children has always been unconditional and genuine. Please, son, don't let them convince you that love is the same thing as toxicity. I was careful not to reveal the full details of the insider trading incident or my massive sacrifice to protect him from criminal charges. That secret was still too dangerous, too potentially destructive. But I alluded subtly to his past struggles and the support I had always provided, hoping to awaken some memory of our authentic connection. You've overcome challenges before, I continued, tears streaming down my face. You've made mistakes and grown from them, and I've always been proud of your ability to learn and change. Please don't let fear make you forget who you really are or who we used to be to each other." Maria Rodriguez, who had watched the entire recording with tears in her eyes, promised to personally deliver the message to James's home. She was as invested in seeing justice done as I was, having witnessed firsthand the cruel campaign that had nearly killed me. But what we didn't know was that Rachel had systematically bribed several staff members at the hospital to monitor my communications and report back to her about my condition and activities. The orderly who was supposed to deliver my message instead handed it directly to Rachel, who intercepted it before James could ever see it. What happened next was so coldly calculated, so perfectly evil in its sophistication, that it took my breath away, even after everything I had already endured. Rachel didn't simply destroy the recording. Instead, she took my raw emotional plea for truth and twisted it into the final weapon against me. Using sophisticated digital editing software, she carefully manipulated the audio and video, altering the tone of my voice, splicing sentences together out of context, and adding ominous background noise that made my desperate appeals sound like the paranoid ravings of an unhinged mind. She cut my heartfelt reminders of James's growth and development in such a way that they sounded like threats and blackmail attempts. She altered the audio of my recordings to make them sound like me rehearsing fictional scenarios. Most devastating of all, she edited my direct appeal to James's conscience to make it sound like I was trying to manipulate him with false guilt and emotional coercion. The doctored video was then sold to a prominent national news channel for a substantial sum, framed as exclusive footage that provided disturbing proof of my mental deterioration. The story ran with the headline, "Retired Photographer's Delusional Hospital Rants Reveal Dangerous Family Obsession." The edited version painted me as a dying woman, consumed by paranoid delusions, desperately trying to blackmail her own son and defame her family's reputation, with elaborate conspiracy theories about financial manipulation and family control. The network's expert commentator, a psychologist who had never met me, analyzed my obvious signs of cognitive decline and my textbook pattern of elder paranoia combined with artistic delusion. When James appeared on national television the next day for what was billed as an exclusive interview about dealing with a parent's mental illness, my heart shattered completely. My son, the boy I had raised to value truth and integrity, sat in a professional studio and delivered a performance that Rachel had clearly orchestrated with surgical precision. "This is incredibly difficult for our family," he said, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "My mother was once a talented photographer, a creative woman who taught me so much about seeing beauty in everyday moments. But watching her deteriorate like this, seeing her become consumed by these paranoid fantasies about family conspiracies and financial manipulation has been heartbreaking." The interviewer asked gentle leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing artistic obsession combined with cognitive decline. James spoke about the difficult decision to seek legal protection from my increasingly erratic behavior and the painful necessity of stepping back for the sake of his own family's safety and emotional well-being. The most devastating moment came when Ethan, now 10, and clearly uncomfortable, but following his scripted lines, appeared on camera beside his father. My beloved grandson, looking sad and worried, spoke about how much he loved me, but how frightening it had become to watch my mental state deteriorate. "I really hope Grandma can get the help she needs," he said, his voice carefully coached to sound both loving and concerned. "But right now, we just need to focus on protecting our family and staying safe." Lisa appeared in the same segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of feigned sympathy, publicly reinforcing James's narrative and making it clear that the entire family stood united against my delusions. Her presence eliminated any possibility that viewers might see James's position as anything other than the consensus view of people who knew me best. The viral video and the television interviews created a perfect storm of public humiliation that reached millions of people. Social media exploded with commentary about the crazy photographer who was tormenting her own family with artistic delusions. The story became a cautionary tale about elder abuse from the other direction. What happens when aging artists become dangerous to their own families through creative obsession. But in my darkest hour, when it seemed that Rachel's manipulation had succeeded beyond even her wildest dreams, an unexpected champion emerged from the shadows. Dr. Williams, my forensic psychologist ally, who had been quietly investigating the situation since the photography exhibition, had been carefully analyzing the viral video with the same methodical approach he had once applied to criminal cases. His decades of experience with digital evidence and his intimate knowledge of my character had led him to some disturbing conclusions. Working with a team of technical experts, he had discovered irrefutable proof of the digital manipulation that had transformed my desperate plea for truth into evidence of my supposed mental illness. The metadata, the audio analysis, the video compression artifacts, everything pointed to sophisticated editing designed to distort my message beyond recognition. More importantly, his investigation into Rachel's background had uncovered a pattern of financial deception that extended far beyond my family's situation. Rachel wasn't just stealing from her own relatives. She was systematically defrauding multiple elderly clients through her newly established family photography business, using her reputation as a victim of elder abuse to gain access to vulnerable seniors and their financial resources. The evidence Dr. Williams had compiled was substantial enough to interest federal investigators and powerful enough to finally give me the leverage I needed to fight back against the elaborate network of lies and manipulation that had consumed my life. As I lay in that hospital bed reading Dr. Williams's preliminary findings on his laptop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: hope. Not just for my own vindication, but for justice itself. The truth was finally beginning to surface, and those who had worked so hard to bury it were about to discover that some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how much power and money you throw at them. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I had an army of truth-tellers standing behind me. Dr. Williams's evidence proved to be the key that unlocked everything. Within weeks of his preliminary findings reaching the right authorities, I found myself at the center of a legal earthquake that would reshape not only my family's future, but the entire national conversation about elder abuse and financial manipulation in America. The funding for my legal battle came from an unexpected source, a collection of vintage family photographs I had taken in the 1980s and 1990s that had become valuable to collectors and museums. The original negatives and prints, which I had carefully preserved and documented, sold for nearly $300,000 to institutions interested in preserving authentic American family history. The irony wasn't lost on me that my life's work capturing genuine family love would finance my fight against those who had tried to destroy it. My legal team was formidable: Dr. Patricia Williams, my retired forensic psychologist ally, Dr. Michael Chen, a family mediator with decades of experience in parental alienation cases, and most surprisingly, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, my former client, who had become a prominent advocate for elder rights. Together, they launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Rachel James and Brenda for elder abuse, financial fraud conspiracy, and the systematic psychological manipulation of my grandchildren. The case attracted global attention almost immediately. Here was a story that resonated with millions of families struggling with financial exploitation, parental alienation, and the complex dynamics of aging in modern America. Media outlets from around the world sent reporters to cover what was being called the family manipulation trial of the decade. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the truth finally exploded into the light. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating for media and members of the public who had followed my story through the viral videos and international coverage. Cameras rolled as Judge Patricia Collins called the session to order, and I felt my heart pounding as Dr. Williams approached the evidence table. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "we are about to present video evidence that will demonstrate beyond any shadow of doubt the calculated nature of the conspiracy and elder abuse perpetrated against Mrs. Nancy Harrison." The first piece of evidence was footage from my hidden security camera, the small device I had installed in my living room years earlier for basic home security. The video quality was crystal clear, showing Rachel and James sitting on my sofa just 3 months after their campaign against me had begun discussing their strategy with chilling casualness. Rachel's voice filled the courtroom with devastating clarity. "We need to be more aggressive about cutting her off completely, James. Every time you show any hesitation, she thinks there's hope. We need to make it clear that she's toxic and that her presence is harmful to Emily and Ethan." A gasp went through the courtroom, but Dr. Williams wasn't finished. The next segment was even more devastating. Rachel outlining her financial desperation and how eliminating me would solve her problems. "Look, I owe $80,000 to some very serious people," Rachel's voice continued. "Every month your mother is around, you feel guilty and want to help her or include her in things that cost us money we need for my debts. If we can make her look crazy enough, maybe she'll just give up and leave us alone. Or better yet, maybe she'll just die already and save us all the trouble." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about family conflicts or personality clashes. This was about calculated financial exploitation and a systematic campaign to psychologically destroy an elderly woman for monetary gain. But the most crushing moment came when the video showed Rachel coaching James on how to manipulate Emily and Ethan. "Just tell them that Grandma is sick in her mind, that she says things that aren't true. Kids that age will believe whatever we tell them, especially if we make it seem like we're protecting them from something scary." When Rachel was called to testify, the woman who took the witness stand bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator who had orchestrated this nightmare. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of her own words, watching herself on screen, plotting my destruction with such casual cruelty, something fundamental broke inside her. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Williams said calmly, "do you recognize the voice on this recording discussing ways to make Mrs. Harrison give up and die?" Rachel's hands shook as she gripped the witness stand. I was desperate," she whispered. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Those people I owed money to, they were threatening my children. I thought if Nancy would just step back, everything would be easier for everyone." So you admit that you orchestrated a campaign to isolate Mrs. Harrison from her family in order to eliminate what you saw as competition for financial resources. I never meant for it to go this far. Rachel's voice broke completely. I thought she would just get the hint and leave us alone. I never thought she would fight us on it. I never thought it would destroy everything. As the weight of her public confession settled over her, Rachel suffered what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. She began sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking so violently that the bailiff had to steady her in her chair. The sight of this woman who had terrorized me for over 2 years, reduced to a broken, weeping figure, was both vindicating and tragic. Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom only made her guilt more obvious. She was apprehended in the hallway by court security, her careful composure finally cracking as she realized that her role as the primary amplifier and enabler of this conspiracy had been exposed. The woman who had helped coordinate attacks and spread lies broke down in desperate tears, her social ambitions lying in ruins around her. Mr. Davies, the lawyer who had enabled so much of this fraud, was immediately taken into custody. His disbarment proceedings would begin within days, and criminal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice would follow. But the most devastating moment of all came when James was called to testify. Hearing his wife's true voice on those recordings, seeing her complete breakdown, and finally confronting the undeniable evidence of his own complicity, my son experienced his own profound psychological collapse. "Mom," he whispered, looking directly at me for the first time in over 2 years. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know how I became this person. I don't know how I let her convince me that you were the problem instead of seeing what she was doing to all of us." James began weeping uncontrollably, his entire body shaking with the force of his realization. "I helped them destroy you," he sobbed. "My own mother and I helped them destroy you because I was too weak to stand up to Rachel, too afraid of losing my marriage to see that I was losing my soul." Watching my son's public breakdown, seeing him finally understand the magnitude of what had been done to our family, was almost unbearable. The vindication I had sought for so long was tempered by the profound sadness of seeing how completely Rachel's manipulation had damaged everyone it touched. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of James's anguished sobs and the gentle humming of the recording equipment that was capturing every moment of this family's complete unraveling. Justice was finally being served, but the cost was higher than I had ever imagined it could be. The court's verdict came down like the final judgment it truly was. Judge Collins's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority as she delivered her ruling, speaking not just to the defendants before her, but to a nation grappling with questions of elder abuse and family exploitation. This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts of criminal elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and parental alienation, she announced. Mrs. Rachel Martinez, your systematic campaign of psychological manipulation and your orchestrated theft of Mrs. Harrison's life savings represent crimes of extraordinary cruelty and calculation. You are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 7 years. Rachel, still broken from her courtroom collapse, could barely stand as the sentence was read. The woman who had launched this nightmare with such confident manipulation was now facing the reality that her greed had cost her not just her freedom, but her entire future. Mr. James Harrison, the judge continued, her voice heavy with disappointment. Your complicity in this conspiracy and your willingness to participate in the systematic destruction of your own mother represents a betrayal of the most fundamental family obligations. You are sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with mandatory participation in psychological counseling and family reconciliation programs. James's sentencing hit me harder than Rachel's had. Watching my son, led away in handcuffs, seeing him turn back to mouth, "I love you, Mom," one more time before disappearing through the courthouse doors, was a pain that no amount of vindication could heal. Brenda received 3 years in prison and substantial financial penalties that would bankrupt her for life. Her dreams of social status and reflected glory had crumbled into public disgrace and financial ruin. Mr. Davies faced 5 years for his role in orchestrating the legal harassment that had nearly destroyed me. But perhaps more important than the prison sentences was Judge Collins's formal statement vindicating my character and explicitly dismantling the false narrative that had been constructed around my supposed mental decline and toxic influence. This court wishes to state unequivocally that Mrs. Nancy Harrison's character has been completely vindicated, the judge declared. The evidence shows a woman of impeccable integrity and profound devotion to family who was systematically victimized by those closest to her. The narrative of her mental instability and toxic influence was a calculated fabrication designed to facilitate theft and abuse. Mrs. Harrison's lifelong commitment to preserving authentic family memories and relationships is what ultimately brought this conspiracy to light. The formal restoration of my dignity felt almost as important as the financial restitution. For over 2 years, I had been painted as a delusional old woman whose love had become dangerous to her own family. Now the world knew the truth. I had been right all along to fight for my place in my family's life. In the weeks that followed the trial, the letters began arriving. The first came from Rachel, written from her prison cell in handwriting that shook with desperation and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Nancy," she wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I need you to understand how terrified I was. The people I owed money to weren't just threatening me. They were threatening Emily and Ethan. I thought if I could just eliminate the competition for James's attention and resources, I could protect my children and save my marriage." She went on to describe the slow progression of lies that had eventually consumed her entire life. "It started with just wanting you to visit less often, but every lie required another lie to support it. Before I knew it, I had created this whole narrative about you being toxic and controlling, and I couldn't back down without admitting that everything I had told James and the children was false." Reading Rachel's letter filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in her admission of guilt, but also a profound sadness for the woman who had destroyed her own life and her children's relationship with their grandmother out of fear and desperation. The letter I had been hoping for came from James 6 weeks after the trial. Written from the federal correctional facility where he was serving his sentence, it was raw, honest, and painful to read. "Mom," he wrote, "I've been in therapy every day since the trial, trying to understand how I became someone capable of participating in what was done to you. Dr. Rodriguez, my counselor, says that admitting what I did is just the first step in a very long journey toward redemption. I know I can't undo the pain I caused you. I know I can't take back the 2 years of hell I helped put you through. But I want you to know that every day in here, I think about the mother you were to me, the sacrifices you made that I never even knew about, and I try to figure out how I lost my way so completely. The truth is, I was terrified of Rachel's anger, terrified of losing my marriage and my children if I stood up to her demands. When she said you were being controlling and manipulative, I wanted to believe her because it was easier than confronting the problems in my own relationship. I chose the path of least resistance, and it led me to betray the person who loved me most in this world. The letter was devastating to read, but it also contained something I hadn't heard from James in years: genuine accountability and a commitment to real change. Whether we would ever have a close relationship again remained to be seen, but I found some peace in knowing that he was finally confronting the weakness and fear that had made him vulnerable to Rachel's manipulation. Brenda's fate was perhaps the most complete of all. Abandoned by what remained of her social circle and facing financial ruin, she entered her prison sentence in complete isolation. Her calculated ambitions, her dreams of elevated status through association with Rachel's perfect family, had crumbled into the bitter loneliness that such schemes always produce. But the most healing development was the gradual transformation I witnessed in my grandchildren. Emily and Ethan, freed from their parents' toxic influence and enrolled in intensive therapy, with Dr. Chen began reaching out to me, tentatively asking questions about what had really happened and expressing their own confusion and growing understanding. "Grandma," Emily said during one of our first real conversations after the trial, "I don't understand how Mom convinced me to say those horrible things about you. I know you're not crazy, and I've always known that. But somehow she made me feel like I had to choose between loving you and protecting our family." The healing process was slow and sometimes painful, but seeing the genuine remorse and love in their eyes gave me hope that the bonds Rachel had tried to sever could eventually be repaired. Emily began asking about my photography, wanting to learn the skills I had tried to share with her before the nightmare began. Ethan started visiting regularly, helping me organize my archives and listening with fascination to stories about our family's history. Most importantly, both children began therapy to process not just the trauma of their parents' imprisonment, but the years of psychological manipulation they had endured. Dr. Chen explained that children who have been used as weapons in parental alienation campaigns often struggle with guilt and confusion about their own role in the abuse. They're learning that they were victims too, she told me. Children that age have no defense against systematic manipulation by trusted adults. Emily and Ethan are beginning to understand that their participation in rejecting you wasn't their fault. It was another form of abuse inflicted on them by people who should have protected them. The victory was complete but bittersweet. My stolen savings had been restored with substantial additional damages for the emotional suffering I had endured. My reputation had been cleared, my dignity restored, my relationship with my grandchildren rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than lies. But the cost had been enormous. My son was in prison, my grandchildren were traumatized, and years of my life had been consumed by a battle I never should have had to fight. Rachel's desperation and James's weakness had created a catastrophe that would take years to fully heal from. Still, as I sat in my reclaimed home, surrounded by the photographs and memories that represented a lifetime of authentic family love, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years. Peace. The truth had prevailed. Justice had been served, and the people who truly loved me were finding their way back to the light. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I wake each morning in my restored home with a sense of profound gratitude that still surprises me. The house that had once been threatened by Rachel's greed and manipulation has been transformed back into the sanctuary it was always meant to be. Every room has been carefully restored to its original warmth and dignity, filled once again with my professional photography equipment, decades of family portraits, and the countless small treasures that tell the story of a life dedicated to capturing and preserving authentic family love. The restoration process had been both practical and deeply therapeutic. Each piece of equipment returned to its proper place, each photograph rehung on the wall, each memory restored to its rightful prominence, represented not just the recovery of my material possessions, but the reconstruction of my identity and my sense of purpose in the world. My financial security has been completely restored, allowing me to live comfortably and independently without fear of manipulation or exploitation. The substantial damages awarded by the court, combined with the continued success of my vintage photography collection, have given me a level of financial freedom I never had, even before Rachel's campaign began. But more importantly, I've discovered a renewed sense of purpose that brings me deeper satisfaction than anything I experienced in my original career. 3 times a week, I host workshops in my home for other survivors of family manipulation and elder abuse, sharing not just my story, but practical strategies for recognizing and resisting psychological exploitation. These gatherings have become the heartbeat of my new life. Elderly people who have been isolated from their families by greedy relatives, grandparents who have been cut off from their grandchildren through parental alienation, seniors who have been financially exploited by people they trusted. They all find their way to my living room, where we share our experiences and support each other's healing. My relationship with James continues to evolve slowly and carefully through his letters from prison. His journey toward redemption is genuine and profound, marked by brutal honesty about his failures and a deep commitment to psychological healing that gives me cautious hope for our future. Mom, he wrote in his most recent letter, I'm learning that the fear I felt about confronting Rachel was really fear about confronting my own inadequacy as a husband and father. I let her convince me that avoiding conflict was the same thing as keeping peace, but what I was really doing was avoiding responsibility for the health of my own family. He's begun participating in family reconciliation programs within the prison system, working with other inmates who have damaged their relationships through weakness, addiction, or poor judgment. I hope someday I can earn the right to ask for your forgiveness. He continued, but even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I'm becoming the man you deserve to have as a son, even if it's too late for us. While our relationship may never fully recover the closeness we once shared, I've found peace in knowing that he's genuinely working to understand and address the character flaws that made him vulnerable to Rachel's manipulation. Whether we'll ever have regular contact again remains to be seen, but his transformation gives me hope that even the deepest damage can be healed with commitment and courage. The most beautiful aspect of my new life has been the complete healing of my relationships with Emily and Ethan. Now 15 and 13, they've become regular visitors to my home and enthusiastic participants in my photography workshops. Their journey from manipulation and confusion to understanding and authentic love has been inspiring to witness. Emily has developed a real talent for portrait photography, and we spend hours together exploring the technical and artistic aspects of capturing genuine emotion in family images. Grandma, she told me recently, I want to understand how you always knew what was real and what was fake. I want to be able to see the truth the way you do. Ethan has become fascinated with my archives, helping me organize and digitize decades of family photographs while I tell him the stories behind each image. Their presence at my support group meetings, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing their own experiences of recovering from psychological manipulation adds a hopeful dimension to our gatherings that touches everyone who participates. Rachel remains in prison, serving her sentence in the isolation that her choices created. I feel no satisfaction in her suffering, only a kind of philosophical sadness about the way fear and greed ultimately destroy those who embrace them. Her letters stopped coming after the first year, and I've heard through legal channels that she's withdrawn completely into herself, unable to face the magnitude of what her desperation cost her. Brenda serves her shorter sentence in similar isolation, abandoned by the social circles she had worked so hard to impress. Her calculated ambitions, her dreams of status through association with what she thought was a perfect family, have crumbled into the bitter loneliness that such schemes always produce. The most meaningful development in my new life has been my work as a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and family healing. Using my story as a powerful example of both the devastation that financial exploitation can cause and the possibility of justice and recovery. I've spoken at conferences across the country, testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger elder protection laws, and worked with legal organizations to help other families facing similar challenges. My memoir, Through the Lens of Truth, A Photographer's Fight for Family and Justice, became a bestseller and has generated thousands of letters from readers who recognize their own struggles in my story. Many have found the courage to seek help for their own situations, armed with the knowledge that psychological manipulation can be overcome and that authentic family relationships can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. The support group I host in my home has become a model for similar programs across the country. Families dealing with parental alienation, seniors facing financial exploitation, and adult children trying to rebuild relationships damaged by manipulation regularly participate in our workshops and healing circles. My life is often filled with laughter now. Emily's excited voice as she shows me her latest photographs, Ethan's animated discussions about family history, and the stories behind our archived images, the gentle conversations of support group participants as they share their journeys from victim to survivor to advocate. As I sit in my garden each evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this place of peace and purpose. The pain of those dark years hasn't disappeared entirely. The scars of betrayal run deep, and I still sometimes wake in the night, remembering the terror of being homeless and abandoned by those I loved most. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It means integrating the lessons of that pain into a life of greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and more authentic relationships. The woman who emerged from that crucible is stronger, more purposeful, and more at peace than the woman who entered it, though the cost of that transformation was almost unbearable. My life now is defined not by what was taken from me, but by what I chose to build from the wreckage. I have my dignity, my financial security, my beautiful home, and most importantly, relationships based on truth rather than manipulation or fear. The victory was worth fighting for, even though the price was higher than I ever imagined it could be. Truth did prevail, justice was served, and a life of authentic purpose and meaningful connection proved to be possible, no matter how dark the circumstances seemed. Years have passed since that devastating phone call when James first told me I was no longer welcome in my own family's life. And as I look back on the journey from that moment of initial shock to this place of profound peace, I'm struck by how completely my understanding of family strength and happiness has been transformed. My life today radiates an inner peace that was hard-won through the crucible of the most devastating betrayal imaginable. This house, once threatened by greed and manipulation, has become a sanctuary filled with authentic joy and genuine purpose. The laughter of Emily and Ethan echoes through rooms that once felt like a prison of isolation and despair. Friends from my support groups, colleagues from my advocacy work, and fellow survivors who've become like family regularly gather around my dining room table, creating the kind of chosen community that's built on shared values and mutual support rather than accidents of birth or legal obligations. I've become a nationally recognized voice in the fight against elder abuse and family exploitation, my story serving as both a warning about the insidious nature of financial manipulation disguised as family concern and a beacon of hope for those who find themselves trapped in similar nightmares. The memoir I wrote has touched thousands of lives, and the letters I receive from readers often tell me that my experience gave them the courage to seek help when their own families tried to exploit their love and trust. The greatest lesson I've learned through this ordeal is that my strength never lay in avoiding conflict or keeping peace at any cost, but in my willingness to courageously confront deception and fight for my fundamental rights and dignity. I discovered that self-worth is truly unshakable when it's built on truth and integrity rather than other people's approval, and that authentic family connections are those based on transparency and genuine care, not manipulation or financial convenience. I carry no bitterness toward those who betrayed me so completely. Rachel's desperation and James's weakness were tragic flaws that destroyed their own lives far more completely than they ever harmed mine. Even Brenda's calculated cruelty ultimately served to clarify what really matters in life and what doesn't. Their choices revealed their character, while my response to their betrayal revealed mine. To anyone listening to my story who recognizes echoes of their own struggles with family manipulation, financial exploitation, or the profound loneliness that can come with standing up for what's right, I want you to know this truth really does prevail, even when the battle seems hopeless. Human dignity can be reclaimed even after the most devastating attacks. A life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible, no matter how complete the destruction may seem. The spirit of resilience that carried me through the darkest valley of my life continues to sustain me in these golden years of advocacy and authentic relationships. My commitment to preserving truth in family relationships, tested by the cruelest manipulations imaginable, emerged not just intact, but stronger and more precise than ever before. The principles I spent 43 years living by proved their worth when everything else was stripped away. Most importantly, I learned that happiness isn't about having the family you were born into, treat you well, but about creating the life you can live with integrity and peace. The woman who sits in this garden today, surrounded by people who love her for who she really is, rather than what she might provide them, is more content and fulfilled than the woman who began this journey, believing that family loyalty was always worth any sacrifice. Sometimes, the most profound courage is found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination to keep fighting for truth when everyone around you has chosen the easier path of lies and compromise. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to become like them, no matter how much they take from you. I am 72 now, and I have never been more certain that love, honesty, and respect for human dignity will always triumph over greed and manipulation, no matter how sophisticated the deception or how powerful those who perpetrate it may seem. The truth is worth fighting for, dignity is worth defending, and hope is always justified, even in the darkest hours of family betrayal.